The roar of engines echoed through the deserted highway as a gang of leather-clad bikers encircled a lone black man stranded beside his car. Their sneers were laced with venom, their words dripping with hate. "What's a guy like you doing here?" one barked, stepping closer, his fists clenched. The man stood calm, his gaze steady, but what the bikers didn't know was that they weren't dealing with just anyone. This was a Navy SEAL, trained, disciplined, and deadly. And tonight, their ignorance would be their greatest mistake. Before we jump into today's story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. If you love powerful stories of justice, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, so you never miss what's coming next. Now, let's get started. It wasn't the first time James found himself being underestimated. It came with the territory of looking like an average guy in a world quick to judge by appearances. Dressed in a simple hoodie and jeans, he looked more like someone you'd pass on the street without a second thought than a man who had faced life-or-death situations in silence. James had learned to let the whispers slide off his back. But tonight, those whispers turned into growls as the bikers closed in, mocking his calm demeanor. What they couldn't see, what they would never expect, was the steel behind his eyes, the resolve of a man who had been forged in the fires of grueling Navy SEAL training. As one of the bikers sneered, "What's the matter? Scared to speak up?" James let his mind replay the countless hours he had spent under pressure that would break most men. But the real question wasn't whether James was ready for them. It was whether they were ready for him. The leader of the gang, a burly man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward and spat on the ground near James's feet. "You don't belong here, boy," he growled, his voice thick with disdain. The other bikers laughed, circling James like vultures closing in on prey. Their insults came fast and sharp, dripping with prejudice, each word meant to strip him of his dignity. James remained silent, his expression unreadable. But inside, he felt the all-too-familiar sting of injustice. He'd seen this look before, the one that said, "You're less than me because of the color of your skin." It wasn't new, but it never stopped cutting deep. One of the bikers shoved him hard, nearly knocking him off balance. "What's wrong? Too scared to fight back?" Another jeered, their taunts growing louder. The group fed off each other's hatred, their aggression escalating. But James wasn't scared. He was calculating. He'd been trained to assess threats, to stay calm under pressure, and to act with precision. What they saw as fear was something far more dangerous: restraint. As the leader raised his hand, ready to strike, James tightened his fists. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about standing up against the hatred that had festered in men like these for far too long, and he knew exactly how to send a message they would never forget. "Before you throw that punch," James said, his voice steady and low, "you might want to think twice." The sudden sound of his voice caught them off guard, calm, composed, and unnervingly confident. For the first time, the bikers hesitated. The leader sneered, masking his unease. "Oh, yeah? And why's that?" he challenged, stepping closer. James tilted his head slightly, his eyes locking onto the leader's. "Because I've taken down men twice your size and twice as mean. I don't want to hurt you, but you're leaving me no choice." The bikers burst into laughter, mocking him, but their bravado began to waver as James took a single step forward. He wasn't posturing or bluffing. There was something in his presence, something in the way he carried himself, that hinted at a power they couldn't yet comprehend. "You think you're tough," one of them scoffed, lunging toward him. In a blur, James moved, disarming the man with a fluidity that seemed impossible. The biker staggered back, clutching his arm, now twisted painfully behind him. "Who the hell are you?" another biker demanded, his confidence cracking. James released the man, who stumbled away in shock and straightened. His voice was calm but carried the weight of authority. "I'm someone who's been trained to handle situations far worse than this. Navy SEAL. You have no idea what you've just started." The bikers froze, realization dawning on their faces. But it wasn't just the words that hit them. It was the way James stood, the quiet power in his every move. And yet they didn't realize just how far out of their depth they truly were. For a moment there was silence, a charged, heavy silence that pressed down on the bikers like an invisible force. The leader's eyes darted between James and his crew, searching for some crack in the man's calm demeanor. "Navy SEAL, huh?" he scoffed, trying to regain control. "Nice story, but you don't scare us." James didn't respond. Instead, he turned his attention to the leader, his gaze piercing. "You should ask yourself why you're scared enough to keep talking," he said quietly, his tone unnervingly even. The leader's face darkened, but his crew wasn't so sure anymore. They shifted uneasily, glancing at each other. One of them muttered, "What if he's telling the truth?" "You really want to find out?" James asked, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. He took a deliberate step forward, forcing the bikers to step back instinctively. The leader growled, unwilling to lose face. "We don't take orders from you," he snapped, but the bravado was slipping. He gestured to one of his men. "Search his car. Let's see who this guy really is." The biker hesitated but moved to the car, yanking the door open. Inside, he froze. There it was. James's military ID, a pair of SEAL badges, and a journal filled with coded notes from missions. He swallowed hard, his hands trembling as he pulled the items out. "Boss," the man called, his voice shaky. "He's not lying." The leader snatched the items and stared at them, his jaw tightening. The rest of the crew began whispering among themselves, the fear spreading like wildfire. James watched them, his expression unreadable. "You wanted to see what I'm about," he said, taking a slow step closer. "Now you know. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" The leader clenched his fists, torn between his pride and the sinking realization that they were dealing with someone far beyond their comprehension. But James wasn't done. He had one more lesson to teach them, a lesson they would never forget. The leader's pride wouldn't let him back down. He tossed the military ID to the ground and spat, "I don't care who you are. You're just one man against all of us." James let out a slow, measured breath, as if preparing himself. Then, with a calm voice, he said, "You think numbers matter? Let me show you what one trained man can do." Before anyone could react, James moved like lightning, swift, precise, and utterly relentless. In a blur, he disarmed the closest biker, his movements so fluid they seemed choreographed. A sharp twist of the biker's arm sent a weapon clattering to the ground, and with a calculated sweep, James sent him sprawling. The others rushed him, but it was as if James could see every move before it happened. He ducked, blocked, and countered with flawless efficiency. Each strike landed with purpose, not to harm more than necessary, but to disarm and disable. The gang's confidence crumbled with every failed attack. "What the hell is he?" one of them gasped, clutching his arm in pain as James turned to face the next threat. James didn't answer. His silence was more terrifying than any words. He wasn't showing off. This was control honed through years of training, every motion calculated to neutralize without escalating further. Within minutes, the once dominant gang was on the ground, groaning in defeat. The leader, now the last man standing, looked at James with a mixture of rage and fear. "You think this makes you a hero?" he spat, reaching for a knife tucked into his boot. James stepped forward, his voice a quiet thunder. "A hero would have walked away. I'm just teaching you that actions have consequences." In one swift motion, James disarmed him, the knife flying from his hand before he even realized what had happened. James grabbed the leader by the collar, pulling him close. "The next time you think about preying on someone you think is weak," he said, his voice icy, "remember tonight, because the weak you mock might just be the one who breaks you." James let him go, and the leader crumpled to the ground, staring up at him in stunned silence. But James didn't stay to revel in his victory. Without another word, he turned and walked toward his car, leaving the broken gang to reflect on their choices. But this wasn't over. Not for them, and not for James. As James started his car, he glanced in the rearview mirror at the bikers, still sprawled on the ground, their arrogance shattered. He could have stayed, could have taught them more painful lessons, but that wasn't who he was. His training had taught him that true strength wasn't about domination. It was about knowing when to act and when to walk away. The roar of his engine broke the silence as he drove off into the night. The bikers were left behind, their laughter and mockery replaced by uneasy murmurs. For the first time, they were forced to confront the reality of their own actions, the blind hatred that had led them to underestimate a man they could never truly measure. But James wasn't thinking about them anymore. As the dark highway stretched ahead, his mind wandered to the countless others like him, quietly enduring prejudice, standing tall in the face of injustice, and proving through action that strength lies in integrity. The world is quick to judge, he thought, quick to divide. But if there's one thing he'd learned, it was this. True power isn't loud. It doesn't seek validation or recognition. It lies in resilience, in standing firm when others try to tear you down, and in choosing to rise above hate. James knew that tonight wasn't just about a fight. It was about making them, and anyone watching, realize that the strongest people are often the ones you least expect. And maybe, just maybe, the lesson he left behind would ripple further than he could ever see. We live in a world where appearances deceive, where bias blinds us to the potential of others. But strength isn't in who shouts the loudest or strikes the hardest. True strength lies in dignity, in restraint, and in proving through action that integrity triumphs over ignorance. Let this story remind us all. Never underestimate the quiet power of a just and resilient spirit. Thank you for watching. Maya's story reminds us that standing up for what's right can create lasting change. Whether it's overcoming adversity or challenging injustice, your voice matters. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment with your thoughts on the story. Let's keep this conversation going. And remember, sharing these stories helps spread the message of justice and fairness, one act of courage at a time. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today.